We can't let our littleness get us down. We can tend to have the rather worldly impression that our success in life follows directly from our smarts, our abilities, our talents, and geez, we don't have many of those. Or maybe we do, but they still don't seem adequate to meet all it seems God is calling us to in our work, our family, our apostolate. Our Lord, of course, is happy to make use of our talents, and he gave them to us so he could. But our faith turns what the world tells us about success and self-reliance very much on its head. After all, the great secret of the spiritual life taught by all the saints and by the spiritual masters of other religions too is that it is actually the recognition of our smallness, our poverty, our inadequacy that invites God's grace to move through us as the wind moves through those sails, propelling us to be and do far more than would be possible on our own. And this movement of grace in our lives often takes place very much in spite of us, as though we were mere onlookers watching God at work. Saint Therese of Lisieux put it like this: what God likes to see is the way I love my littleness and my poverty. She goes on, the weaker one is, the more one is ready for the operations of this consuming and transforming love. So suffering is, of course, a privileged means for discovering our own weakness and our need for God. Trials push us so we can see more clearly our own limits, that we cannot live merely by our own power. For me, it was a difficult childhood that allowed me to discover in my early 20s the power of God to transform my wounds and my limitations into a means of loving and serving him. My mother and father had divorced when I was 4. My mother then went on to marry and divorce 2 more times before I was 19. At 13, I began drinking and then using drugs and engaging in all the behaviors you can imagine a girl at that age who was doing those things would do. By the time I was 17, I found myself on my knees in a 12-step meeting begging God for sanity. One close friend had already taken his own life, and that very year, another friend would do the same. The full story of how this landed me in the church is too long to tell tonight, but I actually brought a handful of CDs if anyone would like to hear the whole thing. Suffice it to say, by God's transformative grace, those tragic life experiences as a young girl became an unyielding gift to my faith, even to this day. Though I would never wish that sort of suffering on anyone, I often think that those experiences gave me a fast pass to recognizing my own poverty, my own human limitations, and the surpassing strength and power of God. And as the little flower reminds us, recognizing our own poverty is a prerequisite to living life as an instrument of God's grace. It seems to me that the more we grow in love of God and in self-knowledge, the more we realize how truly inadequate we are to the task of loving God and serving him as we should. We begin to realize when we've listened closely that we really can't do all that he's asking of us. Indeed, we can't do any of it. We can't save souls. We can't change culture. We can't do our work as well as we should. We can't even love our spouses, our children, our friends, and our neighbors as they ought to be loved, as our Lord calls us in the scriptures and in church teaching to love them. But that, friends, is really the point. When we realize the truly astonishing love God has for each of us personally, and begin to see all that he calls us to through the inspirations he places in our hearts, and at the same moment, we recognize how truly inadequate we are to the task, to fulfilling God's dreams of our sanctity. That's the moment we really get it. And this discovery of our own bankruptcy, as C.S. Lewis put it in Mere Christianity, is likely to be rediscovered many, many times throughout our lives. It's the moment we throw in the towel, or to switch back metaphors to the ship, we stop wasting our efforts rowing in circles and instead expend ourselves on preparing the ship, hoisting the sails, and letting the wind, relying on the wind to guide and propel us. So radically oriented toward God in this way, seeking only to be his instrument, our gifts and our aspirations take on new shape and new meaning. Everything we do our professional work, our family life, our relationships, our apostolate, all is oriented toward being a mere instrument of his love, of his grace, knowing full well that it is only by God's grace, only through his life living within us, that we can do anything well. And so the tensions of competing opportunities and duties, and specifically between our work and our family, while always present because our time and energy are finite, are not irreconcilable or at cross purposes, as some who have written about balancing work and family suggest. Again, this doesn't mean that we don't have to make choices. Oh, yes, we do, and I'm going to get to that. But we can do so in the peace of knowing that all is fodder for the one supreme end, love of God himself.